to the class. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. We do have a few others registered, so as they come, I'll keep an eye out and welcome them. I'm delighted to welcome Kathy Klocek to give us this presentation. I know some of you already know Kathy, and it sounds like for her and for me, it was like, oh, we haven't seen each other in so long. So that was wonderful. Kathy's been a longtime NOM member and come and gone and back and served on the board, and is today going to share with us what one of her new lifetimes was like after NOM and being in parish. So I'm delighted to welcome you. Thank you all. So Kathy, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we can all mute ourselves so we won't have any background noise. And feel free to turn your camera on and see us and see Kathy. And here goes. Thanks, Kathy.
Okay, you're welcome. First of all, we have a nice big dog here, and sometimes he barks whenever he feels like it. So if you hear this big wolf in the background, because I can't mute myself. Normally when I'm on a Zoom meeting, I mute myself so they can't hear this big dog. And so anyway, but right now he's snoozing on the love seat, so hopefully he'll behave himself. So, well, first of all, I would like to thank specifically Kathy Barktall, who originally approached me about doing this. And I've known her for many years in NOM circles. And I also want to thank Diane for being kind of the host moderator. Diane and I served on the board for a number of years. And then we reconnected when we were in Mundelein. So it's good to see her again. And NOM has been almost a constant support for me in my LEM ministry since I joined in 2002. So NOM is an organization that is near and dear to me, and I think it is much needed in the church today, if not even more than when I first joined. Okay, I'm going to start out with a question. When you read the description of this Zoom meeting presentation, what attracted you to it, and what are you seeking? Okay. I would like you to unmute yourselves as you speak. I would like to hear where you're coming from.
Well, I can speak. I'm Lisa. I'm the office administrator at NOM. And, you know, in the last year or so, Diana and Jim and I have been working on grants, and, you know, this meeting I thought could help me get a sense of people's perspectives around the topic. And also I was drawn to it just because it encompasses where so many people are, you know, as lay ministers in so many diverse settings. It just felt like it was a session that would be rich and just so connected to so many people's realities. So, you know, so that's what drew me.
Okay, well, that's good. Okay. Hi,
I'm
Bridget.
I'm Bridget, and I was intrigued to hear your experiences because I did the reverse. I was in healthcare, worked with ethics, IRB, all of that for over 30 years.
Wow.
And left it to go into full-time ministry. And so I'm just curious to see the similarities or differences because I did the reverse.
Okay, well, that'll be good to hear your perspective on it too. Okay, anybody else?
Well, I was attracted, this might tag on to what Lisa was saying. It was the attraction of hearing a first-person account, a story of someone's experience for conversation with others that I might encounter, people who are always, it's like kind of discerning, who work in what you call the secular setting. Am I really doing anything? Am I in ministry? What really is the meaning? And so to hear a story, it's like, well, I've heard this, maybe this will help you. That kind of experience is what I was thinking of when I saw the topic.
Yeah, discernment is certainly a key part of this journey, and I'll talk a little more about that as I get into my story. Okay, who else wants to jump in? Okay.
I will just, my role in the diocese is vicar for pastoral leadership. And so I'm walking with people all the time who are discerning. So any insight, like walking with people, they think they're on a particular path or they're being a certain way. And in the process, another gift emerges and they shift gears, maybe even after they've completed aspects of a process we had. And they surprise themselves because another part of them is opened up, and then they'll say, can I get together with you? And say, you're not going to believe, and then the person's on their second unit of CPE and they thought they were being called to be a parish life director. So that attentiveness to the movement of the Spirit and all that. So, and I'm learning all the time. So hearing your story will be welcome. And I can only be on till 10 up, so I'm going to stop.
Yeah. What diocese are you with?
I'm in the Diocese of Syracuse, New York.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so I'm involved with pastoral planning and pastoral leadership. And the vicar title is new since September because the bishop's changing the structure, but my description of my ministries are still the same.
Same. Well, thank you for sharing. Okay. Maureen?
Kathy, besides knowing you and wanting to hear what you had to say, especially as somebody from Duquesne and a local person to me in Pittsburgh. Yeah. But also I've been involved in a writing project with some people who have been lay ecclesial ministers, and several of them have moved into some form of non-parish ministry. And it's really been interesting to hear them reflect, similar to what other people here have said about discerning, and so what they learned in their own formation about discernment and how it led them out of ecclesial ministry into these other fields. So I was interested in hearing you on that. Yeah.
Well, Maureen O'Brien was one of my professors when I was working on my master's at Duquesne University many, many years ago. And she taught the theology of ministry. And I found that what I learned there was just invaluable. She really put me on a really good road to ministry with that course. It was really amazing. Okay, we have just a few more to jump in.
Yeah, I guess perhaps similar to Bridget, I've only been in, I'll call it paid ministry for 2.5 years, but have been in ministry with the church, probably about 35 years, but had, a full-time job, and it was all a volunteer. So the kind of as Bridget said, the opposite journey, and I think we all share some collective ideas and things like that, and just to see how they kind of go together. They're collective, but then our individual ones come in, kind of complete a picture. And beside the point, I wanted to hear what you had to say.
Well, thank you. Okay. I'm looking forward to hearing some of your comments as well. Okay, we got everybody but.
Hey, hey, I'm
Okay,
Denise.
Denise.
And I'm in my diocese in the Archdiocese of Louisville. I work in the pastoral care ministry training program. So one of the things I do is to help train and support those that go visit in the hospital and nursing home and homebound.
Oh, wow. Well, we'll definitely get into that. So hopefully you will get some information and perspective that you can use. Okay, I think we got everybody, right? Okay, that gives me a much better idea. I hadn't emphasized the discernment too much when I was thinking about this, but I certainly will I can incorporate that because it definitely is a part of the journey and a necessary part of the journey. So I'm going to just give you kind of a brief synopsis of what happened, and then I'll start to talk about how my skills and my gifts were transferred from the parish to a hospital setting. First of all, I was in ministry at St. Bernadette's in Monroeville, Pennsylvania for 11 and a half years. 9.5 years of those times were with one priest, Father Michael Dekowitz, and we got along very well. And he really supported me in my ministry, and he pretty much said yes to whatever I wanted to do. So that was really nice. And but he was extremely supportive. Then he got transferred, and another priest came in, but he didn't last too long. He was there for about 1.5 years. But I got along with him, but he was gone too. So then the third guy came in, and he was there about 6 months when he told me that he wanted to take the parish in a different direction, and I wasn't in the plans. So he wasn't going to renew my contract. So I was very disappointed, but I know these things happen. And I kind of wasn't sure how he really was with lay ecclesial ministry anyway. He kind of had some old-fashioned notions. And so I know some people were very, very upset. There were parishioners, some of my colleagues. I was on the Monroeville Interfaith Ministerium, and a number of the people on that body, were like, well, what can we do? And I just decided that I was just going to allow God to lead me where he wanted to lead me. I had a few years prior, I had 2 hip replacements. I was on the verge of being an invalid in a wheelchair, and I had these hip replacements, and it gave me a whole new lease on life. And I couldn't help but think and remember what Jesus did for Peter's mother-in-law. He cured her, and then she got up and started to minister. So I kind of figured, well, if he did this, he gave me 2 new good hips. I was in reasonably decent good health. He didn't want me to retire. The pastor wanted to spread the rumor around that I was retiring. I wasn't. And I really didn't think that God wanted me to retire because of the fact that he gave me this good health. He gave me these 2 new hips, and I needed to somehow figure out how he wanted me to serve. So I just felt of some kind of an inkling that somehow God was going to show the way. I didn't know where, how, what. I had no idea. So after I was done with my term at St. Bernadette's, I started to just network with some of the people I knew in the diocese and some of my colleagues. And I just started to put the word out, that I was available, spruced up my my resume. And lo and behold, I had called someone who worked in the administration of the diocese. And I had known her for a good while. And I called her and told her, what I was looking for. And she said, "Oh, I'll keep you in mind." Well, 2 weeks later, I get a call from her. She said, "There's this job position that has opened up at McGee Women's Hospital for a chaplain." And she said, "I think you would be great at it," which was interesting because I knew Sister Nora and I was surprised that she was leaving. It turned out that she had decided to retire to take care of her sister. And I had worked with Sister Nora, so I had some idea of the ministry there. Well, it was kind of an interesting situation because the Diocese of Pittsburgh and McGee Women's Hospital had a contract for this position of a full-time chaplain. And the hospital gave a substantial fee. They never shared with me what it was, but they gave it to the diocese. And it was to cover at least a good part of my salary and my benefits. So what the diocese would do is they would zero in on 3 people. They didn't advertise that this was open and available. They wouldn't do that. They wanted to handpick 3 people, and I was one of them. Then they would contact the person at McGee who would do the interviewing. And so he did that. He was actually the head of social work there. And he interviewed me and the 3 people, and I ended up getting offered the job. And I thought, holy cow. So we were a part in the diocese, we were a part of the institutional ministries. And that's where we fell in. Institutional ministries actually was a part of the office of the clergy and ended up answering to Bishop Walter Scheid. So I wasn't thrown in with the lay ministers. I was in the clergy department. So kind of an interesting thing. It's very unusual. But for some reason, that's the way it was. And I wasn't sure still. I thought, I've never even thought of being a chaplain. I never even entered my head to be a chaplain. And I didn't have any kind of medical background. I wasn't real familiar with how hospitals work. And so until the head of institutional ministry sent me a job description. And it was very detailed, and it filled up a whole page in small print. And I went down the list, and I had done everything on that job description, except for one thing. And I don't know if you could guess it or not. I'll just tell you. I had never baptized a baby. And at McGee Women's Hospital, there at the time when I started, over close to 10,000 births happened a year. And some of the births ended up where they needed an emergency baptism because the baby was not in good shape. And so you just had to hustle on down to wherever the baby was, sometimes in the NICU, sometimes in labor and delivery. And you had to do a very reverent but quick baptism. And so within 10 days of my being hired, I did my first baptism, and I did many, many, many other ones. But getting back to this job description, I ended up having many transferable skills and experiences that I could just plug into this secular hospital. And I'd like to just kind of reiterate some of them so that you can see what can actually, where parish work can actually very easily go into hospital ministry or any other secular environment for that matter. First of all, let me look here at my notes. I had done a lot of work with volunteers in the parish. I recruited them, I trained them, I supervised them. They were Eucharistic ministers, they were ladies of charity. I chaired several committees, senior adult ministry, parish health ministry. And so, and I also did a lot with the funerals. I ended up training funeral planners to help out. I trained the ladies of charity to do wake services. I trained some of our lectors to do committal services. And I monitored them and encouraged them. And if there were any issues or problems, you know, I was the troubleshooter. So when I started at McGee, I had just 6 volunteers and they were all Eucharistic ministers. And I thought, oh my gosh, there was on an average of any given day at McGee, you had 270 patients there. And of course, the patients have families, have spouses. And so you are actually, there were parents. So you had a lot more people that you were dealing with than just the patients. So I thought, oh, wow, there's one me. I was the only full-time chaplain. I had a part-time Protestant chaplain. I had a part-time Catholic priest. And eventually we ended up having a part-time lady rabbi. And that was kind of that was the whole team. And you can see with all of those patients and families we were very thinly distributed. So if we really wanted to make any kind of commitment to the patients and to their spiritual care, I would have to recruit and train some volunteers. The problem is McGee is in a very congested, busy part of the city, Oakland. It's right in there with the University of Pittsburgh campuses. And there's like 5 other hospitals within walking distance of McGee. And the only close church is the cathedral. So you're having all of these hospitals that are vying for Eucharistic ministers, and I hadn't even thought of spiritual care volunteers at that point. So what I did was that I just talked to the 6 of my volunteers, and I said, look, I think we need, if we really want to make a commitment to spiritual care here at the hospital, we're going to have to recruit and train some volunteers. And I said, you know, if you know of anybody who would be interested. Well, they really came through. I didn't want to put it in any kind of bulletins or anything, because sometimes you end up getting individuals that probably you're not going to be able to incorporate them. And then it becomes a little complicated to tell them that they aren't going to be able to volunteer. So I just didn't want to go that route because I didn't want any kind of negativity. So that worked out very well. And I prayed a lot. I prayed to God. I said, this is your ministry, God. You know, please send people into the vineyard that will help out. And he did. So in the course of probably around 3 years or so. I'm getting some noise here. Can you hear that noise? We have our lawn person outside. Is that too much noise, or can you hear me? You can hear me? Okay. So anyway, we ended up, we recruited about 30 volunteers. This didn't happen overnight. Some of them became spiritual care volunteers. Some of them were Protestants who I trained to just visit any patients that wanted to be visited. We got more Eucharistic ministers. I even had some volunteers who had ministry training, and we would do prayer services once a month, healing prayer services, and they would be involved in that. And so mostly we just wanted to focus on the patients and the fact that people would go and just listen to the stories of the patients. And so I taught them active listening skills as well as oriented them how you go into a hospital room, what you needed to go before, how you interact with the staff, just completely orienting them to the hospital surroundings. And we had great success. And I think the best thing is they were kind of like my team to go out and tell me which people really needed the kind of care that a chaplain could provide. Sometimes people just need someone to listen to their story, and these volunteers were more than capable of doing that. But sometimes things get more complicated and you really need a chaplain to be involved. So they were kind of like my team that kind of told me who really needed some help and who was doing okay just with the act of listening. And so that was a real blessing. Another thing that happened, and when I was in the ministry at St. Bernadette's, I did a lot with funeral ministry. I was involved in all of it, and I even did grief support groups. And sometimes in the fall, we would dovetail it with All Souls Day, but in the springtime, when we had a group that met for like 6 or 7 weeks, then we would do our own service. And so I would help these people to put together a prayer service, and I would guide them through it. And so what happened at McGee, they had done a few prayer services for staff who had passed away prior to me. But then all of a sudden, somehow it took off. We did one prayer service, and how it worked was the department where the staff had passed away, if they wanted to do it, they came to me and they asked to have that. Then we put together a very small group of people that could share, because sometimes I knew these people and a lot of times I didn't, because we had probably close to 1,500 people working in the hospital. So I didn't get to meet everybody. But when someone passed away, we wanted to make it something very, very personal that reflected the individual. We ended up calling it a celebration of life. And I would guide them in putting together the prayer service. And we would just simply have an opening prayer, closing prayer, and then in the middle, it really reflected the person that we wanted to honor. But it also reflected the needs of the people in that department. Sometimes people would write a little synopsis of what that person meant to them. Sometimes people would offer pictures. Sometimes they would say, oh, this person really loved this song, or one lady, she was she was a devout Catholic, and she loved the Blessed Mother, and she worked in one of our mother and baby units. And she worked in that department for many years, and she was well loved. And when she passed away from cancer, the department really wanted to honor her. So I got a small group together, and one of the nurses said to me, you know, she really loved the Blessed Mother. Could we use some scripture that was about the Blessed Mother? And I said, well, what about the visitation? So we used that as our scripture, and it was perfect because that department deals with mothers and babies, and the visitation is all about two pregnant ladies who are joyful about their pregnancies and about the babies that are coming. And so we used that in the funeral liturgy that we put together, which I would have never dreamt that, but that's how we tried to reflect the person that we had, that we were trying to honor, who had passed away. One time we had, it was a kind of a traumatic experience. We had a rather large maintenance department because we had some very old wings in the hospital that needed to, it was like this old hospital. You've heard of this old house. Well, it was this old hospital, and some of the wings, some were very new, and how they got them all to work together, I'll never know. But we had about 40 people who worked in the maintenance department. Well, one evening, one of the maintenance men had a massive heart attack in our boiler room. And the crash cart from the hospital came in. So that meant also that there were staff that were ministering to him and trying to resuscitate him. And so ultimately he did not make it. And he was only in his 50s. And then I did the same thing of pulling people together. And they said, well, he really wasn't religious. And but there were some very religious people in the maintenance department, and they really wanted to honor him. They really wanted to pray. So we put together, one of the things we did was one of the nurses that was trying to revive him was one of our male nurses from the cancer treatment floor. And Adam had done singing for us, and he played the guitar, and he had just a beautiful professional voice. And I said to him, this fella wasn't very religious, but he liked country music. I said, can you find a hymn that would kind of reflect that and be in that country music genre, but yet could minister to the practicing people? And he did, and it was a beautiful upbeat hymn that he sang using his guitar, and it just hit the spot. So these were the kind of things that we did that really helped the staff to deal with grief in a very secular setting, which is how many secular institutions have memorial services when their staff passes away. I can't think of anybody else. I would hope that somehow they would like to do that, because I think what is happening in this day and age, people aren't having funerals anymore. They cremate the person and then they put them on either the mantle or in the ground. And there's no viewing. There's no coming together to grieve. We had one young woman, she was with us for less than a year, and the family had nothing. And we ended up, we we didn't think we would get much of a crowd, so we had it in the chapel, which sat about 30 people. We had people completely filling the chapel, and they were out the door and down the hallway because so many of her friends and coworkers all came, and that was the only memorial service that they had for her, was what we did. So to me, it's very important, even in a secular setting. And these were transferable skills. I had learned all of that when I was at St. Bernadette's, because I was involved in every aspect of the ministry. So let me see what else. Before we get too far into it, because I know I'm sure you're starting to develop some questions. The no religion practice people. This is something very interesting, because McGee really educated me about these individuals, and I learned something that I would like to share with you about them. First of all, at the hospitals, they have a daily report called the Religious Census. So anybody who's in the hospital will have their name on the religion census. And there we have, like, as many religions as you can think of. That's what would be on the census. In the beginning, the largest group that we initially had were the Catholics, because the Pittsburgh, southwestern Pennsylvania area is strongly Catholic. We're not completely Catholic, but we have a significant population. But as I was there only 6.5 years, not only did the Catholics started to go down, but all of the other faiths started to go down. And the one that kept on increasing was the no religion practiced. So I sort of started to kind of look at them a little more closely. And they're a very mixed, diverse bag. First of all, some are there because they just don't believe in anything. And some of them can even be hostile. I would say they are really in the minority, though. A lot of them are just people who have fallen away. They just fell out of the habit of practicing their faith, of going to church. It wasn't maybe even something that they really actively thought about. They just got busy with other things. And then some of them, religion just was never a part of their family history. So they don't have any negative feelings about religion, but it was just never passed on to them. And so they're not even sure what they're missing. Also, there are some, and I'm trying to get to know them a little bit better. They have a spirituality. They recognize that there is a spiritual part of them, but they do not see organized religion as a way of living out how they see. They sometimes call it the spirit, how the spirit is working in their lives, but they would definitely say that they are spiritual. So, and then sometimes people just get on the list because the intake people just didn't ask them, and they just plopped them in there. And I've found Catholic nuns on that list, Protestant ministers on that list. So you have to be very careful when you get to know religion practice, because it's a pretty complex group of individuals. But nevertheless, because it's increasing, I feel that, when Jesus was doing his ministry, he was in the synagogues, in the temple sometimes, but he was also out with the people. He was out in the fields. He was down by the lake with the fishermen. He was in the marketplace where he came across Matthew. So he was in people's homes. So you could, I never counted it out, but I would say he probably was out and about more than he was even in the synagogues or the temple. And so I think we have to begin to think of ourselves. We have had the luxury in the Catholic Church of people basically coming to us. You know, they come to have their babies baptized. They come to be married. They come to have their children catechized and make their first Holy Communion and confirmations. You know, we have them coming to us. But there's an increasing amount of people that we don't interact with at all on a parish level. And that's what we call either the nuns or no religion practice. And I seriously feel that somehow, I don't know what the answer is, but I think we have to actively pray and ask God for his inspiration on how do we interact with these people? How do we just meet them where they are, not where we want them to be, but just meet them where they are. I think that's an important thing. And I think my working at McGee gave me a much deeper appreciation for this particular group of people and what their needs are. Let me see what else. I don't want to jabber on too much longer because I did want to give you a little bit of time to ask questions and to dialogue. If not, I can. Diane knows I can talk a lot, and so does Jim. So why don't we just open it up to a few questions, and then if not, then we'll just go back to some other things I'd like to talk about. Okay, Diane?
Yeah, Kathy, I was just wondering in, with all that, going from parish to the secular world, as you were saying it, and considering that this was a women's hospital, how did you handle all the moral issues that we often get so focused on, and did those come up, or did they have separate ethics people who did those kind of consults, or just that whole area?
Well, it was kind of interesting about the ethics. I think at one time they did have an ethics committee, and my predecessor had sat on it. But the ethics committee sort of started to not meet as much, mostly because they did not have issues that they had to deal with. And what they found out is they trained the staff to really listen to the patients, really listen to the families. A lot of that got hashed out right there in the units and on the floor. And they didn't have to resort to a committee. And in fact, towards the end, I'm not sure how much they even met anymore. Because my office was right down the hall from the administrative offices, so I kind of knew when they were having meetings and when they weren't, because they all had to walk past my door. So, in a way, I think that is a better way. Periodically, people would ask me, one of the things that came up, I don't think anyone ever came to me on the fence about whether or not to have an abortion. They just seem to avoid spiritual care as far as that issue. The ones that did and had an issue and abortion was recommended was devout Catholic couples who the wife had serious health issues that were life-threatening. And even there, they did not want to terminate the pregnancy, but if they didn't, the mother would have died. because they usually had a super bad case of preeclampsia, and that can really do women in. And I saw women who were so sick that they couldn't even talk to me because they were so sick. And they really wanted these babies. They really wanted to have these children, but they would have died. And so that was, we just had to reassure them that, you know, this was okay. I think other than that, the only other thing that was kind of unusual is I had two young women. They were both terminal. One was 25 and the other one was 32. And they had never been baptized, and they were near death. The staff called me up and said they're near death, and they were requesting baptism. And so I went up there and, you know, kind of put out my feelers, and yeah, definitely, you know, this was something that they actively wanted, and that they're, you know, they still had their decision-making abilities, even though they were starting to really go. And so I baptized the 32-year-old, and it was so amazing. She was near death. And after the baptism, she rallied and she went home and she lived with her family for 2 months. And then the other gal, she was only 25. They had cancer, very bad cancers. And she was only 25, and I baptized her, and she lived for 2 more weeks. These people were near death. So go figure. You just never know. So yeah, and we did, as far as we had a small ICU, and most of the people, because we had a palliative care team that was wonderful, and they really educated the staff and the people, the families, as to what was going on, and they explained to them what they were doing at plan of care. And I would say that virtually all the people I saw, there was not an issue of when the person was truly terminal, whether to, you know, they allowed the family and the patient to decide if they wanted to have more treatment or not. And a lot of it was well beyond, it was extraordinary. So it was really, really up to them. And a lot of times I would go up, and they would be ready to take the people off the machines. And I remember one lady in particular, her complexion was so gray. She was virtually, the machines were keeping her alive. She was already dead. And it was just that the family had to come to grips with it. And so I was there with the family, and she went within 5 minutes. So we never really seemed to have, I think because we really tried to educate people and journey with them and answer their questions. The only time you might have problems is when people that were living in another city that didn't get to see the person and their problems and their issues and where they were, because a lot of stuff can happen. And then they would come in, what do you mean you're not going to do everything you can for grandma? You know, I mean, you know, because they weren't in on the decision making. They weren't in on watching this person decline. And so, so I never really, maybe it was just, you know, the good care that we tried to give everybody that we never, at least I did not see it. You know, maybe there were things that happened that I wasn't aware of.
Mhm. There's a question in the chat, Kathy. What are a few fundamental skills do you think are important for people to know when visiting those who are sick?
I think to attempt to listen to them. A lot of times people are in the hospital and like our staff was really good, but they had their jobs to do, and sometimes they didn't always get to talk to the patients the way they wanted to.
Mhm.
And so it's very important to just go in and to listen to that person and just to ask like open-ended questions, not to not to be too specific, but just to open-ended, of, how has it been for you here? Just things that are non-threatening. And a lot of times people are very grateful for that. Sometimes they just want your presence there. Maybe they're kind of groggy with the medication that they have, and they just find great comfort just in your presence. We feel when we go to visit someone in the hospital that we have to do things, and sometimes
Yeah.
doing is in the listening and in just that ministry of presence, which is so valuable. People underestimate how important that is. And that's something that I always told my volunteers, just your presence there. And they would say, well, I was just there with them. I didn't do anything. I was just there. That it's very, very important. It's a great gift to people who are suffering, people who are dealing with the hospital situation. So, and I think, not to try to give any kind of advice. The medical staff, usually, from what I had seen, did a pretty good job, unless you clearly can see that there is something awry. But usually that's not the case. So that's what I would say is important. Maureen, you had your hand up.
Thanks. Oh, Kathy, it's so great to hear your story. I'm really enjoying that and seeing
thank you.
how you've moved in this direction.
Yeah.
So you've clearly done a really good job of a discernment that allowed you to take this position, knowing you had the background, you had, as you said, the transferable skills, the sensitivities and all that. Once you got into this demanding position that you've exercised so creatively, who and what are supporting and sustaining you in just dealing with whatever is coming along, because there are certainly got to be challenges, but in growing, in your ongoing growth, ongoing formation for this kind of ministry?
I think self-care is critical, whether you're in a parish or in a hospital ministry. I always tried to make sure I went on retreat every year. I was very, very blessed with the chaplains that I got to work with and with the volunteers. They were all just amazing. I could not believe their gifts and their support and their just loving presence. I mean, it was just amazing. When I first met the chaplains, I couldn't believe, it was so amazing. They were such really good people, and they all worked so well together. They all supported one another, and I found that was terribly important to have these people. And then also too, I ended up developing a number of the medical people, especially like in the ICU or up on the oncology floor in the Women's Cancer Center, even down in labor and delivery, and to a lesser degree down in the NICU, that the staff, I got to know them and they got to know me, so that when there was a problem, when there was an issue, they didn't hesitate to call me or one of the other chaplains. And that was, I think, building relationships like that are extremely important. And I found that in a secular setting, Jesus was there. And primarily, Jesus was there in the people that I worked with, as well as in patients, their families. Some of them were just so amazing, and how some of them dealt with some very serious illnesses, and somehow they their faith and trust in God was just amazing. So it was a secular setting, but Jesus was very much there. Very much there. And it was interesting, on my very first day, I was sitting in the office. They gave me the key in advance, so I was going to meet my supervisor there. So I got there a little early, and I was just sitting there at the desk, and I heard someone over in the chapel, because it was right next door to my office. And I heard somebody opening up the closet door. So I went in, and lo and behold, there's this Eucharistic minister, the first one I met, Mary. And lo and behold, when she opened up the door, inside the door was a tabernacle. And the Eucharistic Jesus was present in there. That was the very first thing that I encountered when I started my job. And I felt like, wow, this was very, very reassuring that God was going to be with all of us in the work that we did there. So did that answer your question, Maureen?
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Mhm.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody else?
It does sound like a special place, in a sense of being open to a variety of like beliefs, and that you were able to really be in a setting where the religious lines didn't seem very rigidly drawn, maybe, or something, as would be in some parts of the country.
No, I think, well, first of all, we were a part of the UPMC system, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Centers, which is like a humongous thing. There are many, many hospitals. I don't know what they're up to now, but and they put down their basic values. And the one that I think came to mind more than any other one was dignity and respect. Everyone, it didn't matter who you were, what you did in the hospital. It didn't matter if you were a doctor or a nurse, or you worked in food service or housekeeping. It didn't matter. Everyone was allotted the dignity and respect, everyone. We all had a part to play. We all had an important role to play, and that we should treat each other accordingly. And I found that to be, I'm not sure how many of the other hospitals live up to that, but McGee did an amazing job with that. And I had an interesting, one of the things that I was able to get seminarians to come and do some of their apostolic work there, which I wanted to introduce them before they were priests, so that they wouldn't be afraid to go into the hospital setting, because I had run into priests who were very much shied away from that, and I didn't want these young men to shy away from going into a hospital setting. So I trained them. And then we started with Deacon Candidates, and they were kind of amazing people. And the one deacon candidate, he worked for one of our big banks in the area, and he had worked all of his professional life in this big bank. And so the deacons too had to do some sort of apostolic work. So he was assigned to McGee, and it was just so amazing what happened to him, because at McGee, if you're walking down the hall and someone else sees you, everyone says hi and how are you? I mean, it doesn't matter if you know the person personally or not. Everybody, we greet each other. That's just something that they do. And so when this a deacon candidate would come and walk down the hall and people would say, hi, how are you? He said, coming to McGee was like coming into the sunlight. And he said, where I had been working for like 30 plus years at this bank, he says, it was like working in a cave. I can't imagine what that must be like. But that's the way he described it. And he was close to retirement, so he decided to take a little early retirement. And he's still volunteering down at McGee. And I think he's close to being ordained now, if he hasn't already been ordained. But it was a life-changing experience, all because of this dignity and respect and treating people the way you want to be treated. And I'd heard so many other people. I often, sometimes I had computer issues, so I made friends with one of the computer guys, and he came up, and one day he was telling me how his wife wanted him to go back into the business world, and he said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "I love it here." He said, "This is a wonderful place to work. I don't need the extra money." So it is a special place, but I think it's collectively that they tried to make it that way. I'm not sure if all the hospitals within the system are quite like that, but I know that at McGee they work very, very hard at that. And I don't know if I mean, it's a two-way street. We have joyful parts of it. We have all these wonderful normal babies that get born, and I think that has a positive effect, and I think it affects the whole hospital in a positive way. And so that might be part of it. It could be just that the people just have embraced this and want to try to live it. So, okay. Anybody else?
I just wanted to say, kind of coming from a slightly different angle, I chair the spiritual care advisory board at our local hospital system. And I've always been amazed at a secular hospital, the fact that they, if you will, given their stamp of approval on the importance of spiritual health and care, the whole holistic way of looking at things. And the committee has about 15. There's only 2 chaplains, but the rest are local priests and ministers whose parishioners come into the hospital. And and we plan what does spiritual care look like, to the point of doing a prayer book and closed circuit TV programs and on and on. And one time the liaison, who is the volunteer director, said, the board, I told the board we're doing, and they applaud your work. And I said, well, and we applaud their allowing us to do it.
Right.
So, yeah, so it's really neat. And then during my pastor ministry formation, one of my, what you call it, things you had to do is for 5 years, I was there every Saturday helping the chaplain with his visitations and communion calls and things like that, which kind of was on top of about not 35, but 25 years of healthcare work way down early in my life. So it's kind of neat to see that and to have you explain this same kind of positive experience. It's nice to know. I mean, maybe a lot of hospitals that way. I don't know, but I'm glad ours are.
Yeah, it's I think it varies greatly across the United States, and a lot of it just depends on who's there, where they're coming from. I was very blessed to be where I was. I didn't always perceive McGee as being such a warm, caring place. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to find initially. I was thinking, am I walking into the lion's den, you know? But I was pleasantly surprised at what I found, and I was just very blessed by it. And I just think that people should not be afraid about going in and ministering their faith. I never watered down my Catholic faith. I was always faithful to it. If people asked me, some of the patients would ask me what my denomination was, and I would tell them. It was kind of interesting. One time I was asked to bless a baby, and I went over to the mom's room, and I walk in, and I swear 15 members of the family were in this one room, and there was the baby. And I said, well, I'm here to bless the baby. And they kind of all looked at me and they said, well, we're Baptist. and I said, oh, I've prayed a lot of times with Baptist people. I think I'm able to. And then they sort of begrudgingly said, that they would let me do it then, but they weren't sure if I could really do it the way they wanted it done. So I, based on praying with all kinds of people of all kinds of denominations and faith traditions at the Monroeville Ministerium, I really learned how to pray in many different ways with them. So I relied upon that, and I gave the babies, a blessing. And at the end, one of the ladies said, when we get to heaven, I think we're all going to be one. And I said, and I think we will. We'll have one flock and we'll have one shepherd. So it was nice to see that. But I was really using my experience of working with people of many different faiths and many different denominations that I cultivated when I was at St. Bernadette's, being on the Interfaith Ministerium. And I really learned how to interact with all sorts of people. So really that whole, my whole job there, was kind of like a training program for chaplaincy that I wasn't aware of. God knew what God was doing, but God didn't let me know.
Right. Kathy, there's a question about what might be the kinds of support and resources that are needed to provide to the volunteers who do this ministry. Like what all were the elements of when you said, you would work with them and train them and support them? What all did you include in that? What kind of support and resources for the volunteers?
Okay, there was a book that came out. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy with me, but it was about training spiritual care volunteers. And it gave you in this book, I'm trying to even think who published it. And I'm not even sure how. I might have gotten it through the National Association through Catholic Chaplains. I know that they've had workshops at their conferences about that, about training spiritual care volunteers. and that there were other people in the country that are training spiritual care volunteers. And I didn't use the whole book, but I used parts of the book. And basically, and I finally got a grant where I could actually, instead of just copying parts of the book, I could actually give them a book and they could read the whole thing if they wanted to, but I had certain sections that I zeroed in on. And a lot of it is just kind of things that people need to know when they're going into a hospital room, what to say, what not to say. And then also teaching them active listening techniques, I think is very, very important. It's not difficult. It's just, learning how to really focus on what the person is saying and then reflecting back what you're hearing and asking some open-ended questions. That's, it's not a complicated thing. And as I said before, it's a great gift. And then the Eucharistic ministers, usually they came already trained, usually. And then the diocese periodically has had training for Eucharistic ministers, especially before COVID. I'm not sure what they're doing since COVID, but I usually relied upon the diocese to train the Eucharistic ministers, although I could do it myself because I did train the Eucharistic ministers at St. Bernadette's to go to the homebound within their homes. So that's not a whole lot different from going into a hospital room, because in essence, that hospital room is their temporary home. And so I did that. And a lot of it is just support. Like when they would come back down from the floors, I would try to be there and we would have a debriefing if they ran into any problems or any issues, or they just wanted to talk about, what they had heard, what they had seen. And then I would allow them, they pretty much set their own schedule. I wanted them to let me know when they would be there so I could count on them. But if they wanted to come once a week or twice a month or once a month, it was entirely up to them, how much time they wanted to share with us. So, and then periodically we would, every year we had like Pastoral Care Week, and we would do something like a little a prayer service and a luncheon, and they seemed to really appreciate that. They liked seeing all the people that they were working with. Normally I got to see them all, but they didn't get to see each other. And so it was kind of nice for them to have a sense that they were really on a much bigger team. And so that really helped too. Okay. Do you think that answers the question, or you think, okay.
I think so. Well, I'm aware of time. We have a few more minutes left if there are any last questions, or if not, Kathy, you might want to wrap it up.
Okay.
Buddy.
I would say we should not shy away from going into secular settings. That God does provide for us. Recently, I heard of people taking a spiritual direction practice into a wellness center, a secular wellness center, and doing spiritual direction there, which I thought was kind of a novel thing to do. I would have not thought of that. But people who were concerned about taking care of their bodies and their minds and psychological well-being. Some of them were also aware of their spiritual well-being, and so that would be a very appropriate one that people could follow up on. I would love to hear, if anybody else has been taking ministry into a secular setting and what their experience has been, because I think you know, it's something that Jesus did. He didn't shy away from it. He didn't stay, you know, locked up in the temple or the synagogues. He went all over the place. Wherever the people were, that's where Jesus was. So I would love to hear that.
I have to say, even though when I went from healthcare into parish ministry, when you mentioned earlier about looking, what was the commonalities to transfer? I think the biggest thing I saw is people couldn't understand what I could bring from healthcare in the very beginning. And I worked for Catholic healthcare for the majority of that 30 plus years. And we had gone through a leadership training on ministry in healthcare, specifically the Wheaton sisters had done quite a bit with that. And so it was just interesting because people couldn't see the other way, going the other direction. But I work full-time in parish, but I work part-time in a dialysis unit. And I do pray with my patients. And it's very open. I have a minister, a non-denominational minister as a patient. We pray together. And so it does go both ways very easily.
Yeah, I think very much so. You know, it's you know, that's what Jesus did. You know, he went both ways too.
There's a great comment in the chat that going into secular settings sounds like missionary discipleship.
Yes,
There's certainly Paul there. I think
yes,
that's,
it is.
yeah.
Definitely.
And just what you've been saying, Kathy and Bridget, what you just added, that significant awareness and recognition of transferable skills, that really all of our experiences are preparation for whatever's next. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's really key.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And so
Yeah.
I would just encourage people to some of you are working to encourage other people who are going into ministry. So not to shy away from the secular settings or whatever God is calling you into. God has the plan. And I think that as we had said before, I think discernment is a critical part of that. And a lot of it is just praying and listening and not necessarily saying, well, God, I want this, you know. No, just to be open and just to be listening and to be patient. Trusting. Trust is a huge thing. I know that the patients at McGee all struggled with trust. How can I trust God when I'm dealing with this terminal illness? How can I trust God? The staff, how can I trust God when I have such a sick patient and I can't seem to alleviate their suffering, you know? So it's we all struggle with that trust, but I think that's an integral part of discernment, and a challenging part of discernment is a lot of people say, you know, let go and let God, you know. So
Well, then I think we can bring someone just signed on. I bet they did a time zone mix up, but that's okay. I think really it is time now. We can bring this to a close.
Okay.
Kathy, really want to thank you for your presentation. Just to hear the stories and being there, and it was wonderful for me, and I hope for others. And that sense of not being afraid to go into new and different places. You know, we so often focus our lay ministry and we talk about churchy settings, but you know, to be aware of lay ministers in other settings is a real call. So if there are, I want to thank all of you for coming and hanging in. Pay attention on our nom.org site. There are several other presentations coming up. One next week on part 2 on the ministry of lay catechist. And then there's a couple of sessions coming up in November that I think will be really interesting. So look
Wonderful.
there, yeah, for that. So thank you all
Wonderful.
for coming. And maybe we could close
Sure.
grateful in prayer of gratitude. So let us close in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God, thank you for gathering us together this afternoon. Thank you for Kathy's witness, sharing with us her experience. May we all be open to the guidance and direction of your Spirit, going where you need us to be with and for your people. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you all.
Well, thank you too.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're
This was a
just,
wonderful opportunity.
it is, it's really good. I'm gonna stop our recording now. Okay.